Hi everyone, my name is Jeffrey Lee, and welcome to the third episode where I discuss my book, The Fur Trade and Human Civilization. Today we'll be going over sections 1.3 and 1.4. Starting with section 1.3, which is precious metal flows drive increased consumption. And these two sections will be the last two that we'll go over in chapter 1. So let's start by talking about some context. So silver has been used as currency for about 5,000 years, and before the age of exploration, the production of precious metals such as gold and silver was limited, and many of the sources were in places like Greece, Spain, Germany, China, and Persia, and the production was pretty low and dispersed, and a lot of it was used for religious, artistic, and decorative purposes rather than for commercial use. In general, places like China and Japan used copper coins as currency, while the Eurasian trade used a barter economy instead of a currency one. In addition, however, the influx of precious metal currency led to an incredible amount of economic development and stimulated economic activity and consumption upgrades. So the increase in total amount of metal resulted from the Age of Discovery, which we discovered in section 1.2. So what happened was that Spain and Portugal discovered the Podosi silver mine in Peru and also the Mexico's Zacatecas silver mine, leading to an incredibly larger amount of production of silver, which flowed into Eurasia. In addition, there was a great amount of gold that was produced during the Age of Discovery. For example, from 1493 to 1600, Portugal obtained a total of 276 tons of gold from Africa, and Spain obtained from 2.9 to 5.5 tons of gold annually over the course of only around a couple of years. So how did the silver increase impact the world? Well, this influx of silver caused the economy to change drastically. So, for example, for approximately 400 years following the Age of Exploration, the silver standard, or the bimetallic standard of gold and silver, was used. The gold standard was used for around a century, and then later the gold standard ended, and then this changed to the floating exchange rate system that we have today. So how did the fortune increase affect Spain and Portugal? Spain and Portugal each amassed vast quantities of gold and silver, but quite interestingly, they actually didn't grow economically as much as one would expect, and instead both nations experienced decline and even bankruptcy. So one reason for Spain's decline was the Alhambra Decree, which basically required non-Christians such as Muslims and Jews to convert to Catholicism, leave the country within 3 months, or face death. So many of these people of other religions were philosophers, poets, diplomats, and scientists, and the expulsion of them stifled domestic commercial production and economic development. During the reign of Philip II, the Spanish Inquisition persecuted over 5.5 million people, with approximately 5 million being exiled. This drastic drop in population led to a decrease in economic growth for the country. In addition, Spain was not very wise with their spending. A breakdown of their expenditures included 4 to 16% administrative costs, 4 to 13% court expenses, 1 to 2% on construction, 22 to 28% on military expenses, and 51 to 62% on debt repayment. This shows how they spent so much money on things like the court, military, and debt repayment, and no investment in industry and commerce. This period was dominated by wars such as the Franco-Spanish War, the Dutch War of Independence, military conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, and the famous naval battle between England in 1588, which resulted in the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which shows how much money they had to spend on war. In addition, Spain had to increase their taxes in order to support their economy, which further caused the economy to decline, and Spanish nobles also spent excessively on luxury items. So, an analogy by Ramon Carondelet, a key financier and politician managing Spanish royal finances, describes Spain's situation as Spain is like a mouth. It chews, bites, and swallows, immediately sending everything to other organs, leaving nothing but fleeting taste sensations or occasional scraps caught in the teeth. Spain was famously known as the Golden Tunnel. Despite its fleeting wealth, it was only left with brief memories of luxury. Portugal faced a similar fate. So Portugal, also with a deep devotion to Catholicism, expelled many wealthy and skilled individuals of other religions. In addition, the royalty and nobility of Portugal spent excessively and led to heavy taxation. In general, corrupt leadership was of great importance in the decline economically of these countries. In addition, King Sebastian I of Portugal died in a war against the Rockefeller heir, leading to the replacement with a council, and this also led to a system of corruption that also led to Portugal's decline. In general, the decline of Spain and Portugal is apparent. So between 1600 and 1604, Spain sent out 55 ships, exporting 19,800 tons of goods and returning with 21,600 tons. This dropped to 25 ships and 8,500 and 9,850 tons in 1640 to 1650. And from 1701 to 1710, this dropped all the way to only 8 ships, exporting 2,640 tons and returning with 2,310 tons. That was the impact of silver influx on European countries. Let's talk about how it impacted China. So between the 16th and 19th centuries, the Age of Discovery saw vast amounts of silver flow into China as global trade for Chinese exports such as tea, silk, porcelain, sugar, and cotton textiles increased. Things like blue and white porcelain were of great demand by Europeans, and silver helped foster that demand. So firstly, the China-Portugal-Japan triangular trade. After 1520, Japan discovered multiple silver mines and began using silver to buy foreign goods. Due to the Ming Dynasty's long-standing prohibition of maritime trading, they had to go with smuggling. Portugal suddenly had to use Macau as a way to trade with China, and would also trade these Chinese goods with Japan. In addition, Dutch and Spanish also used intermediaries like Taiwan, Penghu, and Zhoushan, and all of these led to an incredibly large amount of silver flowing into China. According to Li Bongzong, Japan exported about 130 to 160 tons annually between 1615 and 1625, accounting for 30 to 40% of the world's total silver production, most of which went to China. Similarly, there was also the Manila, China, Mexico triangular trade. So Spain established a colonial outpost in the Philippines, which initiated the famous Manila galleon trade. Chinese merchants brought silk and other Chinese goods to trade for silver, and the gold came from America, and this just shows how the Spanish was also highly involved. The European trade with other European countries such as Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, and Portugal also transported silver from Europe to trade to China in places like Macau. The Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company each transported over 4,000 tons of silver to purchase Chinese silk, porcelain, tea, and gold. There was also the China and India trade, which at the time India was the second largest economy and led the world in the cotton textile industry, and India also accumulated large amounts of silver through its trade surplus with Europe, but experienced a trade deficit with China, where they used silver to purchase Chinese silk, porcelain, and tea, and this also showed how silver from India also flowed to China. There was also the China-US trade, where silver from the US beginning in 1784, so U.S. bought China tea, and American merchants also sold ginseng and furs in China in exchange. So just as a quick summary, approximately 21,000 tons of silver flowed into China through overseas trade, accounting for about 15% of the global silver production during that period. And then during that same period, China's domestic silver mines produced about 2,000 tons. Consequently, China's silver reserves increased from about 560 tons to around 2,612 tons over the course of 300 years. So, as a summary of the impacts, this led to an economic growth and production, monetary changes from the copper coins to silver. This also led to fiscal reforms and changes. For example, it was decreed in China that all taxes were to be paid in silver, and farmers therefore had to trade their crops for silver. However, this also led to not great things happening, because this dependence on silver meant that China was very dependent on the production of silver. So during periods of decreased silver production, the Chinese economy also declined. So over the 300 years following 1550, although China accumulated large amounts of silver through trade surpluses, the silver was primarily used for consumption and even hoarding rather than for productive investment. In addition, China's reliance on high-demand, high-profit products like silk, tea, and porcelain created a resource curse, diminishing incentives to use earned silver for technological development and industrial upgrades. This reliance eventually contributed to China's technological and industrial stagnation in the years that followed. So now let's talk about expenditure upgrade and economy development. So geographic discoveries during the age of exploration directly promoted global integration, initially linking the discovered regions economically and culturally. In addition, these economic and commercial developments gave rise to the European middle class, and their lifestyle led to an upgrade in consumption and consumerism. In the Ming Dynasty, the influx of silver increased consumption of luxury items such as ginseng, sable fur, and pearls. For example, the price of ginseng was 3 taels of silver per caddy, rising up to 10 to 15 taels per caddy at the end of the Wangli era. So now let's talk about 1.4, how the fur consumption boom was fueled by rising wealth in the Little Ice Age. So fur consumption boom fueled by rising wealth in the Little Ice Age. So prehistoric humans began trading fur at an early stage. Ancient Egyptians traded furs with Arabs and Phoenicians using plants to dye the furs. In general, fur was seen as a luxury item that signified status. For example, in China, as early as the Warring States period, fur had become fashionable, with official caps known as the Diao Chen and the Diao, both featuring mink tails to signify status. The Little Ice Age also caused an increase in the demand of fur, obviously, because there was a need for fur for warmth, and fur was much more advantageous because it was lighter and didn't require many layers. Fur was also in large fashion in Europe. For example, English King Edward III decreed that only royalty, high-ranking clergy, earls, barons, high society ladies, and church members with an annual income of at least £100 could wear fur. Similarly, Scottish King James I decreed that only men of knightly rank or those with an annual income exceeding 200 marks could wear silk clothes adorned with the finest furs. People wanted to become part of this elite class, and fur was their way in. There was also a large demand for fur in China, so it shows how records show that fur was used by the royalty. For example, the system of first-rank princes using mink fur, second-rank princes using lynx fur, and third-rank princes using plain lynx fur. The Manchu hairstyle involved shaving the front of the head and wearing a queue, and the promotion of fur by the Qin court were strategies for cultural integration. The fur trade also stimulated globalization, leading to global interaction networks involving European colonists, Native Americans, Russians, Chinese, Mongolians, and Northeast Asian indigenous people. So, as we can see, this led to a spread and movement of many people around the world, which we'll discuss in the later chapter, where we talk about how the Russians moved to Siberia and other places in search for the fur trade. Fur was a major product of the North American colonies, leading to the establishment of colonies by the Netherlands, Britain, France, and Denmark, and also led to territorial disputes. And also Russia conquered the Siberian Khanate, Kazakh Khanate, and so on, in pursuit of the fur trade, which we'll discuss in the second chapter. Alright, thank you so much for watching today, and as always, you can purchase the book on Amazon, and the next episode, where we start chapter 2, will be available in a week.